Chapter 1. The Perfect Proposal. I thought I knew Marcus after 3 years together, but standing here in the Sahara Desert with nothing but sand stretching endlessly in every direction, I realize I never knew him at all. My hands are shaking as I clutch the letter he left behind, the one that explains why he abandoned me here to die. But let me start from the beginning, because the truth is so much worse than you could ever imagine. 2 weeks ago, Marcus got down on one knee in our cramped Chicago apartment and proposed with my grandmother's ring. "Sarah," he said, his voice trembling with what I thought was love, "let's celebrate our engagement somewhere magical. How about Egypt? The pyramids, the Nile, everything you've dreamed about since you were a little girl." I said yes to both proposals that night, my heart bursting with joy as I imagined exploring ancient tombs hand in hand with the man I was going to marry. He handled all the arrangements, insisting it would be his gift to me. "Trust me," he whispered against my ear as we lay in bed planning our future. "This trip will change everything between us." The way his arms tightened around me felt protective then, but now I understand it was something else entirely. Guilt, maybe? Or the desperate grip of someone about to commit an unforgivable act. We flew into Cairo 3 days ago, and everything seemed perfect. Marcus was attentive, romantic even, taking photos of me against the backdrop of the Great Pyramid, feeding me dates at the bustling Khan el-Khalili Bazaar. But there were moments. Fleeting glances at his phone, hushed conversations when he thought I was sleeping, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. I convinced myself it was pre-wedding nerves. Last night, he suggested we take a desert excursion to watch the sunrise. Just us, before we get caught up in tourist crowds. I should have questioned why he insisted on driving the rental Jeep himself instead of hiring a guide. I should have wondered why he packed so little water. I should have trusted the ice-cold dread that settled in my stomach when I saw him slip something into my evening tea. But I didn't. I trusted him completely, right up until the moment I woke up alone in this endless sea of sand. Chapter 2. Waking Up to Nightmare. The first thing I noticed when consciousness crept back wasn't the blazing sun or the taste of sand in my mouth. It was the silence. An absolute crushing silence that seemed to press against my eardrums like a physical weight. I sat up slowly, my head pounding from whatever Marcus had slipped into my tea, and realized I was sitting on a blanket in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but golden dunes rolling away in every direction. "Marcus?" I called out, my voice cracking with dehydration and fear. The sound seemed to die just inches from my lips, swallowed by the vastness around me. I scrambled to my feet, spinning in circles, searching for any sign of him or a rental Jeep. Nothing. Just sand and more sand, and a sun that was already climbing too high in the cloudless sky. That's when I saw the envelope tucked under a water bottle. The only water bottle, I realized with growing horror. My name was written on the front in Marcus's familiar handwriting, but the letters looked different somehow, more jagged, as if his hand had been shaking when he wrote them. My fingers trembled so violently I could barely tear it open. "Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll be back in Cairo, preparing to return to Chicago without you. I know you'll never understand, but I had no choice. You were never supposed to find out about Rebecca, about what really happened to her 3 years ago, but you've been asking too many questions lately, and I can't risk you discovering the truth. Rebecca, my sister, Rebecca, who had died in a car accident just months before I met Marcus. The sister whose death had left me so broken that I'd barely been able to function until Marcus came into my life like a lifeline." My vision blurred as I continued reading, each word hitting me like a physical blow. "I'm sorry it has to end this way, but you have to understand, I loved Rebecca first. I loved her desperately. And when she chose that other man over me, when she decided to leave me for him, I couldn't let her go. The car accident wasn't an accident, Sarah, and now you know too much."
Chapter 3. The Truth About Rebecca. I dropped the letter like it was on fire, my legs giving out beneath me as the implications crashed over me like a tidal wave. Marcus had killed my sister. The man I was going to marry, the man I'd trusted with my heart and my life, had murdered Rebecca. And then he'd found me, seduced me, made me fall in love with him while her blood was still on his hands. But there was more to the letter, and I forced myself to pick it up again with trembling fingers. "You look so much like her," Marcus had written. "When I first saw you at that grief support group, crying over Rebecca's death, I thought it was fate, a second chance to be with her. But you're not her, Sarah. You never could be. You're too trusting, too naive. Rebecca would have seen through me eventually. That's why I had to stop her before she could leave me. But you believed every lie I told you." My mind raced back to that support group where we'd met, how Marcus had seemed so understanding, so gentle with my grief. I lost someone too, he'd told me after that first meeting, someone who meant everything to me. I thought he was talking about a former girlfriend or maybe a family member. I never imagined he was talking about the sister he'd murdered. The water bottle next to me contained maybe 16 ounces of liquid, not nearly enough to survive in this heat for more than a day. This wasn't just abandonment, it was attempted murder. Marcus wasn't just leaving me here, he was executing me, just like he'd executed Rebecca. The only difference was that this time, he wanted me to know the truth before I died. I stared out at the endless dunes, trying to calculate which direction might lead to civilization. But every direction looked the same, an ocean of sand beneath a merciless sun. My phone had no signal, which probably wasn't a coincidence. Marcus had planned this carefully, choosing a spot where I'd have no chance of calling for help. But then something caught my eye, a glint of metal in the distance, half buried in the sand. I stumbled toward it, hope fluttering in my chest like a dying bird. "Please," I thought desperately, "let it be something useful. Let it be a way out of this nightmare."
Chapter 4. Buried Secrets. The metal object was larger than I'd expected. A silver locket, partially buried in the sand, its chain tangled around what looked like fragments of glass. As I brushed away the sand with shaking hands, my heart stopped. I recognized this locket. It had belonged to Rebecca. The locket was engraved with her initials, RM, Rebecca Marie, and inside was a photo I'd never seen before. Rebecca, smiling at the camera, but not alone. She was standing next to a man I didn't recognize. Someone tall and dark-haired with kind eyes. They looked happy together, in love. On the back of the photo, written in Rebecca's handwriting, were the words, "David and me, Egypt, 2021, our secret adventure." Egypt! Rebecca had been to Egypt, but that was impossible. I would have known if my sister had traveled to Egypt. We told each other everything, or at least I thought we did. My hands shook as I examined the glass fragments more closely. They looked like pieces of a car windshield, weathered by sand and time, but still recognizable. The pieces of this horrific puzzle began clicking together in my mind. Rebecca hadn't died in Chicago like I'd been told. She died here, in Egypt, with this David person. Marcus had somehow found out about their relationship, followed them here, and my stomach churned as I imagined what had happened next. But why had Marcus brought me to the exact spot where he'd killed my sister? Was this some sort of twisted justice in his mind? Or was there something else here he needed to make sure stayed buried? I began digging frantically in the sand around where I'd found the locket, and that's when my fingers hit something else, something that made my blood run cold. It was Rebecca's cell phone, remarkably preserved in a waterproof case. The battery was long dead, but I knew this phone. I'd bought it for her birthday 2 years before she died. My sister had been here, in this exact spot, 3 years ago.
and judging by the glass fragments and the desperate way her locket had been buried, this was where Marcus had murdered her. I clutched the phone to my chest and let the tears come. Rebecca hadn't just been killed in some random car accident back home. She'd been murdered here, in this beautiful, terrible place, probably while trying to start a new life with someone who actually loved her. And I'd been so stupid, so trusting, that I'd let her killer convince me to marry him.
Chapter 5. Fighting for Survival. The sun was climbing higher, and I could already feel my skin beginning to burn despite the early hour. I forced myself to stop crying and focus on survival. If I was going to get out of this desert alive, if I was going to make Marcus pay for what he'd done to Rebecca and what he was trying to do to me, I needed to think clearly. I rationed a small sip of water and tried to remember everything I'd ever learned about desert survival. Find shade during the hottest part of the day. Conserve water. Look for signs of civilization. Don't panic. The last one was the hardest, especially with Marcus's letter burning in my pocket like a confession written in acid. That's when I noticed something else glinting in the sand, a few yards away from where I had found Rebecca's phone. More glass. But this wasn't from a windshield. It was from a mirror, a car's side mirror, to be exact. I followed the trail of debris, my heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. About 50 yards away, partially buried beneath 3 years of shifting sand, I found it. The twisted metal frame of what had once been a small rental car, Rebecca's rental car, the one Marcus had probably forced off whatever road they'd been traveling, sending them tumbling into this remote part of the desert where no one would ever think to look. I circled the wreckage slowly, trying to piece together what had happened. The car had rolled multiple times. That much was clear from the way the roof was completely crushed. But there was something else, something that made my blood freeze. Scratches in the metal near what had been the driver's door. Scratches that looked deliberate, like someone had used a knife or a screwdriver to jam the locks, trapping whoever was inside. My sister hadn't died instantly in a car accident. She'd been trapped in this wreckage, probably injured, probably terrified. While Marcus... I couldn't finish the thought. It was too horrible, too deliberate, too cruel. But then I saw something that gave me the first spark of hope I'd felt since waking up in this nightmare. Near the car's trunk, partially hidden under a piece of bent metal, was a jerry can, a red plastic container that looked like it might still contain fuel. If there was even a small amount of gasoline in there, I might be able to use it to create a signal fire, something visible from the air.
Chapter 6. The photo that changes everything. I pried the jerry can loose from the wreckage, my heart racing when I heard liquid sloshing inside. Not much, but maybe enough. As I worked to free it completely, something else caught my attention. A leather portfolio wedged beneath the car's twisted frame, its contents scattered but protected from the worst of the weather by the metal above. Inside the portfolio were photographs, dozens of them, and travel documents. As I spread them out on the sand, my understanding of everything I thought I knew began to crumble once again. These weren't just vacation photos, they were surveillance photos, pictures of Rebecca and David taken from a distance in various locations around Egypt, Cairo, Luxor, Aswan. Someone had been following them, documenting their every move. But the photos weren't taken by some random stalker. Written on the back of each one in Marcus's handwriting were dates and locations. Rebecca at the Sphinx, day 3. Rebecca and Target at Karnak Temple, day 5. Target. He'd called David Target, like this was some kind of military operation. My hands shook as I found what appeared to be the final photograph in the sequence. Rebecca and David standing next to a small rental car, the same car that was now buried in the sand around me. But they weren't alone in this photo. In the background, barely visible but unmistakably there, was Marcus. He was watching them, and the expression on his face was pure hatred. That's when I found the travel documents, and everything clicked into place with horrible clarity. Rebecca hadn't come to Egypt for a romantic getaway with David. According to the papers in the portfolio, David worked for the State Department. He was a witness protection coordinator. And Rebecca, my sister Rebecca, had been his witness. The newspaper clipping tucked between the travel documents explained everything.
Local woman testifies against mob-connected boyfriend in federal case. The photo accompanying the article showed Rebecca walking up courthouse steps, her face partially hidden but recognizable. She'd been testifying against Marcus. Marcus, who apparently had connections to organized crime that went much deeper than I had ever suspected. Rebecca hadn't been running away with a lover. She'd been running for her life with the help of a federal agent who was trying to keep her safe. And Marcus had hunted them both down in the middle of the Egyptian desert where no one would ever think to look for them. I stared at the documents, my mind reeling. This meant that everything Marcus had told me was a lie, not just about loving me, but about who he really was. I hadn't fallen in love with a grieving man who understood my pain. I'd fallen in love with a killer who had murdered my sister to keep her from testifying against him.
Chapter 7. The desert reveals its dead. As the sun reached its peak, I sought shelter beside the wreckage, using a piece of twisted metal to create a small patch of shade. That's when I made a discovery that nearly broke what was left of my sanity. Partially buried beneath the car, hidden by 3 years of shifting sand, were human remains. 2 skeletons, still partially clothed, still wearing jewelry I recognized. Rebecca's silver bracelet, the one our mother had given her for graduation, was still clasped around the wrist bones of the smaller skeleton. The larger skeleton wore a watch and a ring that must have belonged to David. They died here, in this car, and Marcus had simply left them to be buried by the desert. But they hadn't died in a car accident. Even with my limited knowledge of forensics, I could see that both skulls showed signs of trauma that hadn't come from the crash. Fractures that looked deliberate, purposeful. Marcus hadn't just caused the accident, he'd made sure they couldn't survive it. I fell to my knees beside my sister's remains, finally understanding the full scope of what had happened. Rebecca had tried to do the right thing, tried to testify against the man she'd once loved, and for that courage, she'd been hunted down and murdered in one of the most remote places on Earth. "I'm so sorry, Rebecca," I whispered to the bones that had once been my sister. "I'm so sorry I didn't know, didn't help you, didn't even realize you were in danger." The wind carried my words away into the endless silence of the desert. That's when I heard it, the distant sound of an engine. My heart leaped with hope before crashing back down into despair. What if it was Marcus, coming back to make sure I was dead? What if he'd decided that leaving me here wasn't enough, that he needed to finish the job personally? I grabbed the jerry can and scrambled away from the wreckage, looking for higher ground where I could see what was approaching. About a quarter mile away, I could make out a dust cloud moving in my direction. A vehicle, definitely, but I couldn't tell what kind or how many people were in it. I had a choice to make. I could hide and hope they passed by, which would likely mean dying slowly of dehydration, or I could take the risk that whoever was in that vehicle wasn't Marcus, that they were my salvation rather than my execution. As the engine sound grew louder, I made my decision. I unscrewed the cap of the jerry can and began pouring gasoline in a line across the sand, then pulled out the lighter I'd found in my pocket. Rebecca's lighter, I realized, probably dropped during her final moments. With shaking hands, I lit the gasoline and watched as a line of fire erupted across the desert floor.
Chapter 8. Rescue and Recognition. The vehicle that emerged from the dust cloud wasn't Marcus's rental Jeep. It was a battered pickup truck with Egyptian license plates, and behind the wheel was a man in his 60s wearing traditional desert clothing. He saw the fire immediately and headed straight for me, his face a mixture of concern and confusion. "Please," I called out in English as he approached. "I need help. I'm lost." He stopped the truck and climbed out, speaking rapidly in Arabic before switching to accented English. "You are American?" he asked, hurrying toward me with a water bottle in his hands. "What are you doing here alone? This is a very dangerous place." His name was Ahmed, and he was a local guide who'd been tracking a group of tourists who'd gone missing 2 days earlier. "You are not with the tour group?" he asked, as I gulped down the water he offered. When I shook my head, his expression grew more concerned. "Then how did you get here? Where is your car, your guide?" I didn't know how to begin explaining, so I showed him Marcus's letter. Ahmed read it slowly, his face growing darker with each line. When he finished, he looked at me with something that might have been recognition. "This man, this Marcus," he said carefully. "I think maybe I know him. 3 years ago, there was an American man who hired me to bring him to this area. He said he was looking for his girlfriend who had run away with another man. He paid me very well to bring him here and to ask no questions." My heart stopped. "You brought Marcus here 3 years ago?" Ahmed nodded grimly. "I thought he was heartbroken lover, you understand. He seemed so sad, so desperate. But when we found the car, the accident, he told me we must not report it. He said the police would not understand, that there would be too many questions. He paid me more money to keep quiet." "You saw the car when it happened?" I asked, barely able to breathe. "Not when it happened, but maybe 1 day after. The man, your Marcus, he was very calm for someone who had just found his girlfriend dead. Too calm. And he spent long time alone with the wreckage before he called me over. I wondered then if maybe—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "You suspected something was wrong," I finished for him. "Yes, but I had no proof, and he was American, wealthy. Who would believe old desert guide over rich tourist?" Ahmed's voice was heavy with guilt, "But I have regretted my silence every day since, and now he has tried to do same thing to you." I showed Ahmed the wreckage, the photographs, the remains. His face grew pale as he examined the evidence of Marcus's crime. "We must go to police immediately. This man, he cannot be allowed to escape."
Chapter 9. Racing Against Time. Ahmed's truck bounced and lurched across the desert as we raced toward the nearest town with a police station. I clutched Rebecca's phone and the evidence I'd gathered, my mind spinning with everything I'd learned. Marcus had a several-hour head start, and by now he was probably already on a plane back to Chicago, ready to play the role of the grieving fiancé whose beloved had tragically disappeared in the Egyptian desert. "The police in Minya will help," Ahmed assured me as we hit a paved road for the first time in what felt like hours. "Inspector Hassan is good man, honest man. He will believe you." But I wasn't sure belief would be enough. What proof did I really have that Marcus was responsible for Rebecca's death? The photographs could be explained away as a coincidence. The letter was damning, but would it hold up in court? And even if the Egyptian police were willing to pursue the case, Marcus was already back in the United States, probably beyond their reach. That's when I remembered something that made my heart race with possibility. Rebecca's phone! If I could somehow get it working, there might be evidence on it, messages between Rebecca and David, maybe even documentation of their federal case against Marcus. "Ahmed," I said urgently, "we need to stop at an electronics store. I need a charger for this phone, and I need it fast." "There is computer shop in Minya," he said, pressing harder on the accelerator. "But why is old phone so important?" I explained about the federal case, about Rebecca's testimony, about everything I'd pieced together from the documents in the wreckage.
Ahmed's eyes widened as he understood the implications. "If your sister was working with American government," he said slowly, "then this is not just murder. This is international crime. The American embassy in Cairo, they will be very interested in this." We reached Minya as the sun was beginning to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red that reminded me painfully of the fire I'd lit to signal for help. The computer shop owner looked skeptical when I explained what I needed, but Ahmed spoke to him rapidly in Arabic, and soon I had a universal charger connected to Rebecca's phone. It took several agonizing minutes for the phone to power up, and when it did, it immediately began receiving a flood of missed messages and voicemails. 3 years' worth of automated notifications. But buried among them were messages from David, from federal agents, and from Rebecca herself. Voice memos she'd recorded documenting everything she knew about Marcus's criminal activities. As I listened to my sister's voice for the first time in 3 years, tears streaming down my face, I realized I was holding the evidence that would finally bring Marcus to justice. Rebecca had been thorough, careful, brave. She documented dates, times, locations, names of Marcus's associates. She'd built a case that could destroy him even from beyond the grave.
Chapter 10. The Truth Calls Home. Inspector Hassan was a tall, serious man with kind eyes who listened to my story without interruption. When I finished, he examined the evidence I'd brought, the letter, the photographs, the phone recordings, with the careful attention of someone who'd seen too much tragedy to dismiss anything quickly. "This is very serious matter," he said finally. "If what you say is true, we have American citizen who committed multiple murders in Egyptian territory. But we must be very careful, very thorough. This man, he will have lawyers, he will claim innocence." That's when Ahmed spoke up. "Inspector, there is something else. 3 years ago, when I found the car with this man Marcus, he gave me money to stay quiet. But I kept the money, all of it, thinking maybe someday I would need to prove what happened. It is still in my house. American dollars with his fingerprints." Inspector Hassan's eyebrows rose. "You kept the money for 3 years?" "I could not spend it," Ahmed said simply. "It felt like blood money. I knew someday the truth would come out, and I wanted to be ready." While Inspector Hassan made phone calls to Cairo and to the American embassy, I used the police station's internet to search for news about Marcus. What I found made my blood run cold. There was a brief item in the Chicago Tribune from 2 days ago. Local man reports fiancé missing during Egyptian vacation. The article quoted Marcus extensively. "Sarah was so excited about this trip," he was quoted as saying. "We'd gone to bed after a wonderful day touring the pyramids, and when I woke up, she was gone. I'm worried she might have gotten lost trying to take sunrise photos in the desert. Sarah was always impulsive like that." He was already building his cover story, already playing the part of the concerned fiancé. The article mentioned that Egyptian authorities were conducting a search and that Marcus was cooperating fully with the investigation. I could picture him giving interviews, accepting sympathy from our friends and neighbors, maybe even planning a memorial service. But then Inspector Hassan got off the phone with news that changed everything. "The American embassy has been very interested in what you have told me. It seems there has been investigation into this Marcus for some time. Your sister's disappearance, it was never closed case. Agent David Morrison, he had filed reports before he died, reports that suggested your sister was in immediate danger." "David Morrison," I repeated, "the name from the photographs, the man who died beside my sister." "Yes, he was trying to bring your sister into witness protection, but she insisted on collecting more evidence first. She wanted to make sure Marcus could never hurt anyone else." Inspector Hassan's voice was grim. "She was very brave woman, your sister. Too brave, perhaps." The phone on his desk rang, and he answered it in Arabic, speaking rapidly for several minutes.
When he hung up, he was smiling for the first time since I'd met him. "That was Cairo Airport security. They have found your Marcus. He tried to board plane to Chicago 2 hours ago, but he was stopped. It seems the American authorities, they have been waiting for him to return."
Chapter 11. Justice in the Desert. The next morning, I stood in the desert beside my sister's grave, the real grave that Ahmed and I had carefully prepared for her and David's remains. Inspector Hassan had allowed us to conduct a proper burial before the bodies were transported back to their families, and as I watched the sun rise over the endless sand dunes, I felt something shift inside me. "She saved my life, you know," I said to Ahmed, who stood respectfully beside me. If Rebecca hadn't been so thorough in documenting everything, if she hadn't hidden that evidence where I could find it, Marcus would have gotten away with murdering all 3 of us. Ahmed nodded gravely. "Your sister, she was thinking even when she was dying. She knew someone would come looking for truth someday." Inspector Hassan joined us as we finished the simple ceremony. "I have news from Cairo," he said. "Marcus has confessed. When they showed him the evidence from your sister's phone, the photographs, Ahmed's testimony, he knew he could not deny what he had done." "What will happen to him?" I asked. "He will be tried here, in Egypt, for the murders of your sister and Agent Morrison. Then, if he survives Egyptian justice, he will be returned to America to face charges for the crimes your sister was trying to testify about." Inspector Hassan's smile was grim. "Either way, he will never be a free man again." I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. For 3 years, I'd grieved Rebecca's death without ever knowing the truth of how she died. I'd let her killer comfort me, love me, plan to marry me. But Rebecca herself had made sure that justice would eventually find him. As we walked back toward Ahmed's truck, my phone buzzed with a text message from my mother back in Chicago. "The FBI just called," the message read. "They want to talk to me about Rebecca's case. Sarah, what's happening? Where are you? Are you safe?" I looked out at the desert where my sister had fought and died for the truth, where she'd left me the clues I needed to survive and bring her killer to justice. The sun was climbing higher now, but instead of the merciless heat I'd feared yesterday, it felt warm and welcoming, like Rebecca's presence still watching over me. "I'm safe, Mom," I typed back, "and I have so much to tell you about Rebecca. She was even braver than we ever knew."
Chapter 12. Coming Home to Truth. 6 months later, I returned to Egypt, not as a victim this time, but as a survivor, ready to face my demons and honor my sister's memory. Marcus had been sentenced to life in prison by an Egyptian court, and the criminal organization Rebecca had been testifying against had been dismantled by federal authorities using the evidence from her phone. Her courage had saved countless lives, even after her own had been taken. I stood once again in the spot where I'd been abandoned to die. But this time, I wasn't alone. Ahmed was with me, along with Inspector Hassan and a small group of Rebecca's former colleagues from the federal prosecutor's office. We'd come to dedicate a memorial marker, a simple stone that would ensure this place would be remembered for Rebecca's bravery rather than Marcus's cruelty. "She knew the risks," said Agent Jennifer Martinez, who'd worked with Rebecca on the case against Marcus. "But she insisted on seeing it through. Someone has to stop him," she kept saying. "If I don't do this, he'll just find another victim." The agent's voice was thick with emotion. She was right, you know. When we arrested the rest of his organization, we found evidence that he'd been planning to target other women, women who looked like Rebecca, women like you. I shivered, thinking about how close I'd come to becoming just another name on Marcus's list of victims. If I hadn't found Rebecca's evidence, if Ahmed hadn't decided to speak up,
If Inspector Hassan hadn't been willing to pursue justice across international borders, any one of those factors could have changed everything. As the sun began to set over the memorial marker, Ahmed approached me with something I hadn't expected to see again. "I thought you should have this," he said, holding out Rebecca's silver locket, now cleaned and polished until it gleamed. "She would want you to remember her as she really was, brave, smart, protecting others even in her final moments." I clasped the locket around my neck, feeling its familiar weight against my chest. Inside was still the photo of Rebecca and David, looking happy and hopeful in a moment before they knew how their story would end. But now I understood that their story hadn't really ended in that desert. It had continued through the evidence they'd left behind, through the justice they'd made possible, through the lives they'd saved by refusing to give up. The flight back to Chicago would take me over this same route I'd traveled with Marcus all those months ago, but everything had changed. I was no longer the naive woman who'd trusted her sister's killer. I was someone who'd survived in the desert, who'd uncovered the truth, who'd brought a murderer to justice. I was Rebecca's sister in every sense of the word, brave enough to face the truth, strong enough to survive it, and determined enough to make sure it mattered. If this story moved you, if you've ever had to face a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about someone you loved, please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about courage, survival, and the unexpected places where we find justice, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more emotional travel stories that prove sometimes the most important journeys are the ones that take us into the darkness before bringing us back to the light.